Welcome, brave souls, to the chilling depths of horror and detail. Today we're going to share scary Wendigo horror stories. First story. I am the sole remaining employee of an abandoned water park. The summer I got a job here I was 17, and it was a good year. Ellen Ditsworth used to work the hot dog stand, and we'd sneak cigarettes under the beams of the Dragon Slayer ride, cringing and giggling as the cars went overhead, dripping water all over us. Wet hands and damp cigarettes, but it was near her station, and I think she found it funny to get splashed. It was out of the way, too. It was always quiet and cool down there, even in the summer heat. If any of the ride-goers smelled our cigarette smoke as they hurtled overhead, they didn't say anything. One time, when we fumbled around and flirted, I kissed her fingers and they smelled like an ashtray. I still think about it to this day. I was 22 when they offered me the winter job. Ellen was long gone by then. No more bright red short shorts and poorly shaven legs that she'd invite me to stroke under the pretense of showing just how bad she was with a razor. There were other girls, but by the time the final summer rolled around, I'd long felt uncomfortable hanging out with new hires. Sometimes I'd stand there listening to them talk, and I'd feel lonelier than I had when I was by myself. I was thinking about my future around this time when the manager told me he had an opportunity for me to make good cash. They needed someone to stick around and keep the place ticking while everyone went back to the real world. Usual guy had walked, and they needed someone bad. Last day before the park shut for winter was always Halloween, and that was only because it had a fireworks show. After that, it turned into a ghost town, and I'd be on my own. I'd get a trailer to sleep in, and I could use my own car to get to the closest shop. The park would pay some of my gas. Not all of it, but enough to help out. Only real problem was I'd be alone. Not that the place was a desert island. There were 2 towns within easy driving distance, and I could have friends around so long as we didn't mess with the rides. But other than that, I'd be the only staff member on hand for the entire 4 months. Security guard and janitor rolled into one. I agreed, but I told him when the park reopened in March I'd be done. I figured it was time to move on, get a degree like some of my friends had. Or maybe my dad could help me out with a job somewhere. World was wide open to me, and I figured I'd sit on my ass all winter, make a shit ton on overtime, and then go on to some new adventure where I'd meet another Ellen Ditsworth or 2. Yesterday, I turned 38, and I'm still in the park. Government signs my checks now. Couldn't tell you when that happened exactly. Probably after the media got wind of Denise Surrey, who broke in with her friends and never left. A lot of kids have gone missing here over the years, but she was the one who went mainstream. Her parents were doctors and she had blue eyes, so she got just enough attention to get the news cameras out. When the fuss died and the media moved on to its next story, some government guys came and installed 8-foot steel palisade fences. Gave me the keys to the only gate in Scarpa real quick. Gave me a funny feeling seeing 4 men in suits, barrel-chested with pistols on their hips, climb into an unmarked vehicle and accelerate out the parking lot so fast the back of the car fishtailed. One of them looked over his shoulder at the park, and he was so scared it was like he was looking at a mushroom cloud. I was the one who found Denise. She'd gone crawling head first down the Astromissile water slide. One of those up and down kind of slides that have you bouncing along on a padded dinghy. Rides like that are usually open top, but this had long sections in a closed tunnel with LED lights to look like stars. Thing is, depending on weight, some people would catch air and hit the top of those tunnels going 20 mph, maybe more. We used to take turns going in there to pull out any teeth that had got stuck in the roof. 15 years later, and that tunnel mouth looked like something out of a nightmare. Fairy moss covering the opening. Darkness inside heavier than the night around it. Bone dry and with no obvious way to safety. Denise died of thirst. They think she was in there for 6 days, crawling around in the pitch black looking for an exit. Should never have been more than 100 feet away. There were signs something was wrong with this place back when it was still open. I just didn't register them. There were the injuries and accidents that are common in every water park, but we had a couple hundred serious ones every year. Usually one a day. Tried to mitigate it with safety measures, but half the time they didn't work. Radios would bug out when you'd try sending a warning. Repair guys would get lost, calling up angry, saying the road just kept going right forever, and they'd had enough of this shit. Out-of-order signs would go missing. Sometimes kids would insist some staff member had waved them through on a closed attraction. They'd be so adamant, I started to believe them. I think the manager did too. He made it policy to have name tags on us at all times, and if the kids said whoever gave them the go-ahead didn't have one on, he'd tell us all to forget it. Like it wasn't even worth trying to figure out who needed a disciplinary. I had it happen once where I radioed to the guy at the top of one slide and told him to stop any kids coming down. The last one had come out bleeding and looking unresponsive, and I wanted to check on him. I remember pulling him out of the water and looking at this boy all slack and pale as a sheet of paper with blue lips. So fucking cold it hurt just to hold him, and I wondered if I was holding someone dead when out of nowhere another kid slammed into me, so hard I went under. Scared me shitless cause for a second or two. It was like I couldn't see the surface of the pool. Almost like there wasn't one. Just blue forever and ever. Before I could start to panic, my feet found the floor, and I surfaced only to see the kid I'd been holding seconds ago, standing there looking worried. He was the picture of good health. Asked if I was okay. Said sorry for hitting me when he came out the slide, but really it was my own dumb-ass fault for standing there in the first place. Guy at the top swore on his life he'd never got any radio message from me. I put it all down to the head injury, which was bad enough the owner made someone drive me to the emergency room. Looking back, I'm pretty sure it was the park having its fun with me. Could have been worse. You could say it likes to play tricks, but those tricks are mean as hell, and over the years they've only got worse. Despite all I've told you so far, the first winter alone wasn't as bad as you might think. Creepy as hell walking around all those rides that were usually so busy and full of life. Tarpaulins pulled across all those pools, big and small, moving with gentle susurrations in the icy winds. It wasn't great in the day, overcast and dreary, the air seemingly blue. But at night it was even worse. I made those rounds quickly, stopping sometimes to summon what little bravery I had to shine a light in the pitch-black toilets, or to check one of the changing stalls dotted around the place. Things went missing a lot. Moved around. Once one of the rides came to life at 3 a.m., and I woke to the sound of tinny music echoing throughout the park. But winter came and went without any real incident. First day the park reopened, I went to see the manager and slipped in some water. Broke my left arm and did a number on my back. Owner was so scared of being sued he threw money at me. Told me he'd cover the medical bills and sit me up in my trailer and pay me to do nothing. Nothing. What was I going to do? I'd arranged to start another job on a construction site in a few weeks, and there was no hope of me doing that kind of work with my injuries. I needed money and had no other way of making it. I agreed to stick around until I felt better, but unfortunately I never felt better. Winter soon rolled around again, and the same deal as last time was back on the table. He needed someone on site, and I needed money. I took it thinking another few months in the park wasn't so bad. I was wrong. Second time round was a lot worse. Part of it was me. 23 years old, and with a bad back, drinking most nights and struggling with the prescription painkillers. Spent most days haunted by the strange feeling that my life's honeymoon phase was over. Hardly any friends accepted my invite to come spend a couple weeks, and those that did weren't around long. Couldn't tell you if that was just us growing apart, as friends often do, or the park's strange influence. Dave came round with his girlfriend for a couple nights. She grouched the whole time, hated sleeping in a trailer while I stayed in a tent outside. But she hated the park too. Said she felt watched all the time. Trip was cut short when we found her screaming one morning. She was pointing at one of the slides, saying something had come out of it, and was in the pool swimming around, but when we looked we didn't see nothing. She did have a hell of a bite on her ankle, though. funny shape to it. Dave looked at it and got real freaked out. They left in a hurry. Another car's tires screeching as it hauled us out of here at top speeds. Never did figure out what happened, but if she didn't like the park, well, I guess it didn't like her either. Not that I was much safer. Found myself getting cut up like crazy doing basic odd jobs. Things broke all the time, even if they'd been fine for years and years. And then one night, I came into my trailer to find a drowned possum on the little kitchen table. Poor thing was soaked in chlorine water that dripped onto the floor in a puddle. No marks going to or from it, like it just appeared there out of thin air. It stank like hell, though. It had clearly been dead for days and days. I gingerly dropped it into a garbage bag using a pair of tongs and threw the lot in a dumpster, but I still couldn't spend more than a few seconds in the trailer without gagging, so I slept in the tent instead. Pitched it as close as I could without picking up that smell, but I had a bad feeling the whole time I set it up, like I was being watched. By the time I was climbing inside, it was midnight, and I was desperate to get to sleep and see the cold night turn to day. Barely an hour later, and I had to climb back out of the tent because the trailer door was banging in the wind. Okay, I told myself as I shuffled over in my tidy whiteies, arms wrapped around my chest for warmth. That's my own stupid fault for leaving it open. I closed it in a hurry and went back to the tent, but stopped dead in my tracks when I saw the zipper was pulled shut. I hadn't left it like that. I didn't know what to do. My brain went in two directions at the same time. One said I was mistaken. I had closed the tent and just forgotten it. The other said something or someone had crawled inside and was waiting for me. It had set the whole thing up as a trap, and the best thing to do was to get in my car and drive until the sun rose. But I was already half cut and knew I shouldn't be driving. The skeptical half of my brain made an appealing case. The world isn't a nightmare, it said. It can look like one sometimes, but it isn't real. If you hear a bump in the night, you go looking and find it was all nothing, and you take a deep breath, laugh at yourself for getting scared, and move on. Still, it took everything I had just to take a step towards the tent, and I shone my light at it hoping to see some sign of something in there. By the time my hand was on the zipper, I was shaking like a leaf and rethinking my ethical code of not driving drunk. But when emotions get that high, it's like you run on autopilot. Must be a survival thing. I opened the flap without really telling myself to, and then I was looking inside my tent, and there was nothing there. I crawled inside quick as I could, pulled the zipper back the other way, and tried to go to sleep. I settled down for maybe another 30 minutes when something's hand pressed against the tent wall, and that was when I started screaming. The way it came at me, palm open, fingers spread, tent fabric stretching to near breaking point. Makes my skin crawl just to remember it. Long fingers that tapered to a point, almost razor sharp, and a palm not much larger than a golf ball, even if the fingers spanned a dinner plate. In the nightmare reality of the moment, I saw it the way I might see a spider. Equal parts disgust and terror. I had to get away, and I backed up so fast I wound up rolling the whole tent like a hamster ball. Lost the zipper in the panic. Didn't find it again until the last scream finally left my lips, and I was forced to catch my breath in the silence of an empty night, accepting that whatever was out there was either laughing its ass off at me or waiting patiently. Either way, I was at its mercy. Only thing I could do was collect myself and leave the damn tent. When I finally climbed free, there was no one waiting for me. Only a couple wet footprints going to the nearest pool. I considered pulling the tarpaulin back and looking, but I was already scared shitless and had no courage remaining. Instead, I ran into the trailer, slammed the door shut, barricaded it with every last piece of furniture that wasn't bolted to the floor, and fell asleep with the smell of rotten meat filling my lungs. Come morning, I was thankful for the sunlight and the feeling that last night's events were just a dream. After that, I locked my trailer door every night, and I never slept in that tent again. No more possums, but it isn't uncommon for me to find scratches and dents in my door each morning. Nothing serious, but looks to me like the probing of a curious animal. Couple days later, something locked me in the boys' bathroom near the east end of the park. I'd only gone in cause one of the faucets was running. I just turned it off when the door slammed shut, and I couldn't get it open again. Had to kick the lock out, which isn't an easy thing to do. First kick, I nearly broke my ankle. Second time hurt just as bad, and I had to take a breather to cope with the pain. Found myself pacing and occasionally stopping to listen for any sign of someone waiting for me outside. Someone I could shout at, blame it all on. Anything to keep the anger churning and not let it turn to fear. It was a full hour before I got panicked enough to give it my all and finally broke the lock. Burst into the cold air, all red-faced and flustered, and found the park silent as a graveyard. Just those tarpaulins waving gently in the breeze. I learned some important lessons that winter. If you feel watched, feel like you're walking into a situation someone planned, it's because you are. When the park reopened, I was out of there without a moment's hesitation. Finally got that job on a construction site, and it lasted all of 3 weeks before I hurt my back again. Spent the rest of the summer laid up on my dad's sofa drinking and watching daytime TV. Got a call off the manager around August, and he told me it had been a bad summer. Not only had the cops been sniffing around like crazy cause some poor kid went missing in the area, but they'd had twice as many injuries as before. Said he'd just spent the day in court hearing testimony from the parents of some kid who'd never walk or feed himself again after he hit his head on one of the rides. He sounded pretty beat up about it. He wasn't the best boss, but it wasn't like we worked for Mr. Burns either. Poor guy was way out of his depth. Anyway, part of the court settlement was he had to have staff members on site 24/7. I'd done it twice before, and he was desperately in need of someone who knew the job. I nearly said no, but he told me it was me or some 17-year-old lifeguard who'd shown interest in the job, and I didn't like the thought of that. God help me, I accepted, and when I went back that third time, I took a gun. And this time I trusted my instincts. If I walked past a changing stall and heard the shower running, I let it run. Hour later, it'd be turned off again. If I saw someone had left the lights on in the staff room, I let them stay on until morning when I could deal with it in the comfort of daylight. Flushing toilets, wet footprints, open doors. I learned to stop sweating the little things, and 9 times out of 10, they went away on their own. Pretty soon I found myself laughing at them. A big fat wallet sitting in the middle of a solitary lounger that had been dragged into the moonlight. A phone ringing from somewhere in the depths of a maintenance hatch. Those kinds of crude tricks weren't going to work on me, I decided. Thought I had it all figured out, and there was nothing left for that place to show me. And then the park ate a drifter. Or something did anyway. Did it right in front of me, too. I'd found the guy sleeping in one of the brick and mortar bathrooms. We got to keep those things warm enough to stop the pipes bursting, so I guess they make decent enough shelter. He was an agitated old fuck. Called me all sorts as I told him to clear off. He didn't make for the main exit, though. It wasn't like he'd parked a car in the lot, was it? Instead, he just made a beeline for the nearby hills. No fences in that part of the park back then. Only open fields moving into woodland. His plan was to just walk into the wilderness in the middle of winter, and I wondered if I was actually marching some guy to a cold death. I remember looking at his shoes and seeing the backs of his heels exposed, and I realized I couldn't let him do that. Snow was due to fall that night, and I knew it was going to get real bad out there. "Hey," I cried out while slowing to a stop. "Look, man, it's late, I'm sure." My words died out. I didn't really know what to say when he turned to face me. He was angry and tired, and I knew he wasn't ever really going to be thankful for some randomer's charity, but that didn't mean I shouldn't try. For a moment, the only sound was the tarpaulin of the large pool to our right. Was just about to cough up some more words when his feet went sideways. His body rotated around his center of mass, and the next part of him to touch solid ground was his head. It made a noise that makes my teeth ache just to think about. A percussive, almost musical note that really shouldn't be made by a human skull. The blood that sprayed across the tiles reminded me of when I'd go paintballing with my friends. I remember looking down at it and noticing a couple loose teeth. Strange feeling. For a few seconds, everything turned to a kind of white noise as ancient instincts rooted me to the spot with fear. Paralyzed me. Million thoughts went through my head. The guy was dead. Something had taken him. That blood used to be inside of him. I have blood inside of me. Does my blood look like that? These thoughts were like the sparks that fly off a loose electrical wire, but I was stuck mired in them until the whistling in my ears faded and I heard something being dragged across the floor. The guy hadn't even gone that far. He'd flown about 8 feet and landed just on the edge of the pool. His legs were in the water, hidden behind the tarpaulin, and only his top half was on dry land. His head was a ruin of blood and matted hair, but he still managed to look at me for just a moment before he slid the rest of the way below the water with a quiet splunk. The realization he was alive kicked my ass into my gear, and I ran over to the circuit box and hit the button that pulls back the pool cover. Machine ran loud as it drew the blue heavy sheet back across the water. Felt like eternity waiting for it. When it was finally over and I could look down into the water and see clearly there was no one there. Not even a cloud of blood polluting the pool. Nothing. I felt like I was going insane, and I even looked over and double-checked that the guy's plastic bag was still where he dropped it just so I could be sure I hadn't made the entire thing up. I really didn't know what to do. The only thing in that water were a couple leaves that had made it in their overfall, but that was it. And then I saw it. I can't explain it easily. It was a sudden overlap of realities, a bit like the hollow cube illusion where it can be two things at once. Without ever taking my eyes off it, that pool became every deep body of water I'd ever seen. All of them, all at once. It was every calm and glassy ocean surface with rays of diffuse light leading into unseen depths. Every lake with murky kelp fingers reaching up out of the dark. Every flooded basement with black and brackish water. I could smell the stagnant water, could feel the breeze you get standing on the coast, taste the salt. All of it at once. And something moved in those infinite waters, and it was big. It was like the first time I saw the Grand Canyon big, like when you get on a plane and see the ground pull away so quickly it loses perspective. Whatever was down there was coming right at me, and I'm not ashamed to say I pissed my pants. An ocean full of stars was down there, and the thing swimming towards me had a body that obscured entire nebulae. I felt vertigo come over me, and I backed away, and I slipped in the blood, and then I woke up a few hours later and started screaming. I had to clean up in the morning, and I had to pull the tarpaulin back across. Machine only goes one way, so I had to do it with a pool stick, and it made me feel sick just to go near it. Every time I got close, I started to feel dizzy again. When I finally mustered the courage to look, there was the same old pool it had always been, but I'd never shake the feeling I had when I was looking down in it and saw teeth like tectonic plates. When summer rolled back round, I saw a bunch of kids in that pool and had to go be sick in a bush. The thought of them sharing space with that thing, Jesus. After that, I felt like I belonged to the park, weird as it sounds. Manager didn't have to fight me to get me to stick around for a 4th winter or a 5th or 6th. The rest of the world didn't feel so real to me anymore. Sitting and eating dinner with my father while he lectured me on my prospects. Getting a beer with an old friend who was passing through. I felt like I'd gone into fucking space and seen the world was flat, and now I had to just come on back and pretend like I cared about whether my soda was diet or not. Not long after that, the park had its last ever summer. It had gone too far by that point. Government was looking to close it all down on account of the accidents, and the manager was down the station every other day for questioning. For kids missing that year alone, I found one of them folded up inside a pool filter, but didn't report it on account of not wanting the attention. The rest I don't know about. I was told I'd be paid another month or so after closure until a demolition crew came in, but no one ever arrived. Just me, this place, and a back that's getting worse with each new winter. I don't patrol at night anymore. Little by little, the park has become something unfamiliar to me. Grass growing up between old tiles. Pool water the color of cut grass and engine oil. Even in the day, you can see things moving around down there. And the smell of chlorine no longer fills the air. Now it's the heavy stench of rotten algae and dead water, and sometimes the tang of the salty ocean that I've learned to avoid like the plague. Makes me see stars in the corner of my vision and I don't like it. My dreams are bad enough. Drowning in the dark, something huge bearing down on me. I've woken up more than a few times and vomited up salt water. I can't bring myself to think what any of it means because I just don't want to know. Last time I went in the park after dark, I had a close call. Worst of my life. I've been thinking about leaving ever since, but I worry there's not much else out there for me at this stage. That, and I kind of feel guilty I didn't save all those kids with the cameras. Urban explorers, they call themselves, and I say kids, but really they were college students who record videos for something called TikTok. Anyway, they came prepared, scouted the park, even scouted me, working out my routine and where my trailer is so they could avoid my general line of sight. I had no clue they'd watch me for a whole day. Once they figured I was passed out or asleep, they drove their van as close to the fence they could find, climbed the top, and hopped on over. For about an hour, they got what they wanted. I've watched the footage 100 times. Broken down toilets covered in graffiti. Smashed windows and broken glass covering the floor. Old pools full of ancient water covered in thick, brackish scum. You can hear the glee in their voices. That kind of urban decay was their bread and butter. And they were good at it too. They stayed quiet. Didn't shout or break anything. They just filmed. It wasn't until they decided to try rowing out to the castle that things took a turn. I came too late. What got me out of bed was a scream, maybe a few of them. It was blurry, and I came to around 3 a.m. and still a little tipsy, my head foaming at the edges with a half-remembered dream of a hollow world filled with water. As soon as I saw the van, I realized someone had gotten inside the park, and I hadn't just been dreaming the sounds of splashing water and panicked. But by the time I went in there myself, the place was silent. I really didn't want to search it at night. I hadn't gone in there after dark for a few years, and things had only gotten worse. Set something off inside me. A kind of spiritual Geiger counter is how I think of it. An intense primordial warning system that made the shadows around me look almost infinitely deep. More than that, I guess it felt alien. Sounds stupid, but it really did feel like I wasn't on the same planet anymore. I don't know. That part might just be all in my head, but that's how it felt that night. I pushed myself just about as far as I was willing to go when I heard it. A rhythmic hollow knocking. It was coming from one of the largest pools in the park. A shallow, kid-friendly one we called the castle because it had a giant jungle gym in the center. A kind of spaghetti mess of platforms and climbing bars and slides that the kids loved. I followed the sound and saw a pile of rucksacks and even a large camera on the very edge of the pool, and there, just a couple meters away, was a rowboat. The idiots had brought it with them. Probably thought they were being smart by avoiding the water below. At least they'd tied it off so it was easy for me to pull back in. I gave it a cursory inspection, shivering at the mere thought of floating across that nightmare water in something so flimsy, and was ready to leave it until the morning when I heard a quiet splashing. Something had climbed out the water, and my heart dropped as I instinctively flicked the torchlight towards the sound of dripping water and saw a thin, shivering shape climb onto the lowest steps of the castle. It looked gray and sickly, and then it started whimpering, and I realized I was looking at a girl. College-aged, with stringy hair and an outfit that might have been colorful before she'd gone in the water, but now it was just the color of ash and moss. At a glance, she almost didn't look human anymore. She looked more like a starving animal, shell-shocked and shaking. I shouted out to her, but it was as if she couldn't hear me. She dragged herself up onto a dry platform and curled up in a ball in the far corner, knees pulled to her chest, and wide eyes locked into a 1,000-yard stare. And something was in that water. It came close to the surface, displacing small branches and causing the thick pond scum to bulge, but never break. From the looks of things, it was circling the castle, and in some parts where the algae wasn't so thick, I got the faintest glimpse of colorless scales the size of my hand and a thick muscular trunk. Sometimes it seemed to bump up against the castle, like it knew the girl was nearby, but it didn't know how to get to her. The whole thing shook, and she'd whimper extra loud, but she still didn't show any signs of becoming lucid. I'd be lying if I said I didn't think about leaving her until morning. She was unresponsive and looked like she was just going to stay in the same place. Wouldn't it be better to just go get her when the sun was up? I thought. But that was a pretty fucked up thing to think. She wasn't safe there. I wasn't safe just standing inside of the water, and she was on some old piece of plastic held together with rusting bolts. What if it collapsed? What if something came out of the water? God knows it could happen. Something had touched my tent all those years ago. Who's to say it wouldn't walk on out to take her? At some point I made the decision. Don't know exactly what did it, but I think it was the sound she was making, that and the knowledge she'd been in there. God knows what she'd seen. I had to have sympathy. She needed help, and I was the only one around who could give it. So once something deep inside me clicked, I knew I had to move quickly before the fear started to fuck with my head. I grabbed the rope and began to pull the boat towards me. I wasn't sure what would happen. Half expected something to breach the water like a hungry shark and swallow the boat whole. But instead, whatever was circling the castle just slunk into the depths and stayed out of sight. Somehow that was even worse, and I found myself scanning the water obsessively as I worked up the courage to get into the boat. I tried to keep the momentum, though. I didn't let myself start thinking or doubting myself. I just climbed in awkwardly, 1 foot at a time, damn near shitting myself when the whole thing wobbled, and I briefly felt like I was going to lose my balance. But I managed it, and soon I was sitting down and using the oars to pull myself through the water. As I rowed, my brain moved along in different directions. Part of me was almost watching myself, like from above, and asking over and over, what the fuck are you doing? While another watched that water for the slightest sign of life, and a third part of my brain was watching me for signs I was going to crumble from the adrenaline and ice-cold fear coursing through my veins. Each time the oars broke the water, I kept waiting to see something coming after me. And I was about halfway there when I realized that if it was big enough, it could just bowl the whole boat over like a shark knocking a surfer off his board. It was too far to turn back when I saw the water rise in the distance. Again, it didn't break the surface, but it came close and sent a couple waves rolling across the entire pool where they lapped against the distant edge. They made the whole boat rock side to side like it was just a bit of driftwood. When the bulge in the water appeared again, it was on the other side of the boat, and I made the terrible decision to stop rowing and look over the edge. There was no bottom to the pool, but whatever was down there wasn't swallowing continents anytime soon, at least. Hard to pin size down, but based on the steely blue fins that slid by close beneath me, that didn't really matter. It could eat me easy enough, and that was all that mattered. Hell, I wasn't even sure if it was a fish or a squid or something else entirely, but I was pretty sure it still had a mouth somewhere in that murk. It gave the boat a gentle knock. Nothing serious. Not enough to roll it, but enough to let me know it was interested in me. I decided I couldn't just stay there floating in one place forever. I had to move. I grabbed the oars and threw all caution to the wind. The sooner I got off that water, the better. Sure, I'd have to figure out how to get back, but that was a problem for later. Right there and then, all that mattered was the rising terror and disgust that took all my strength to keep from bubbling up in a full-blown panic. As soon as the boat began to move, the creature slid out of view again. Didn't know if I ought to be relieved or even more afraid, but I took advantage of the lull in its activity to close the distance, and once close enough, I pulled the boat over to the same steps the girl had climbed. Once there, I secured it with a bit of the rope and hopped onto the first step, cringing at the way the ice-cold water felt slick and slimy against my ankles. The girl flinched at my touch, but she didn't scream or pull away. I told her it'd be okay, or something like that. Tried my best to sound reassuring. Tried to let her know I was going to get her somewhere safe. I managed to pull her to her feet when she finally turned and looked right past me. I barely existed to her at that moment. She only had eyes for the water behind me. Something about the look on her face gave me pause, though. She wasn't scanning for danger. She was looking right at something, and before I had a chance to look for myself, she started screaming. When I saw it, I wanted to scream too. I'd never seen anything like it. Or since. A head like seaweed. A face like a scallop. It watched us with an almost casual interest that frightened me more than any predatory scowl. The look of a child about to pull a spider's legs off. The thought of it still makes my skin crawl. It was so still, so alien, I couldn't help but pause and wonder if I was looking at something real or if it was just bad special effects. And yet the moment stretched on, until something in that unknowable mind made a decision, and the creature disappeared back beneath the water. I made a decision too, and I dragged the young woman to the nearby boat where she started to fight me the moment she saw it. Can't say I blame her. Last time she was on it, she nearly died, but there was no third option. It was stay and die or take our chances getting to safety. Unfortunately, we had barely gotten within a meter of the thing when the whole boat was blown sky high with tremendous force. For a few seconds I stood there dumbstruck, the girl crying, and water falling from the sky like a momentary rainstorm. When the boat finally returned to Earth, it was a couple 100 meters away and hit dry land with a great crash. My stomach sank. How the hell were we going to get off the castle now? Not a moment later, and the entire structure began to shake. By now the girl was close to hysterics, and I wasn't far behind. I took her hand and began to look for some high ground as that thing began to shake and batter the flimsy plastic supports that held the platform up. We were forced to climb up towards the plastic roof of the tallest tower, which wasn't exactly all that high up, but it was the best we could do. The bars leading to it weren't easy to navigate, and at one point I slipped and fell backwards, striking my chin painfully and looking up to see the girl going ahead without me. For a moment I nearly gave up, but then there was the sound of something snapping and the entire castle began to slide on one side. I looked down and saw black water rising up to meet me. The thought of sinking into that filth ignited something inside me, and I scrambled up the last few rungs and perched on top of the smooth plastic cover of the castle's highest turret. It was barely large enough for us both to sit on, but it was all we had. Looking back, I can't help but laugh. I'll make it sound like a great tower, but it was barely 12 feet off the ground. As soon as I was up there looking down, water quickly bubbling towards us, I realized just how badly we were fucked. We delayed our inevitable death by mere seconds at most. By the time the bright red piece of plastic we clung to hit the water, the castle had broken apart, so all its little pieces went floating in different directions. Ours was the last to go in, and it went down beneath our collective weight until the water reached our waists. And then it came back up, buoyant and hollow. It was no boat, but it came damn close. "Paddle!" I cried at the girl, and she did, and we pulled ourselves through the water to the nearest edge. Pretty soon the makeshift raft bumped up against the tiled wall, and we were dragging ourselves up on a dry land where she rolled onto her back. I continued to crawl for another few meters until I felt like I was far away enough from the water. Only once I felt safe, I let myself collapse and lay crying and laughing for what felt like hours. But the girl only cried. At first a whimper, then a sob, and then a howl. A painful gut-wrenching scream that made my own joy wilt until I could do nothing except listen to the raw grief in her voice. When I sat up to see if she was okay, she was sitting upright and staring at the thing that was rising out of the water. Again, no malice. Not really. At least I don't think so. It'd be like looking for a recognizable expression on an oyster. But it did watch us calmly as it ate what I can only assume was one of her friends. A man, I think. Hard to remember details. He didn't cry, but he did look at us for help that we couldn't give. I'm not sure I could even tell you how it ate him, but it looked painful and slow. Reminiscent of a starfish, I think. At some point the girl passed out, and not long after so did I. I doubt she ever made a full recovery. The only thing she managed to say, Even hours later, after the paramedics had sedated her and I'd finished giving my less than truthful statement to police, were the words the stars over and over. I think a lot about how changed I was when I first looked down into that water and saw the abyss below, but that poor girl was actually in it. She'd swam in those waters. Submerged. I don't even know how she came back from an ocean that doesn't have a surface, but she did, and somehow I don't think she'll ever be the same. But it's got me thinking about myself, about what I've lost to it. Jesus Christ, I'll be 40 before I know it, and what then? Just gonna wait here forever and ever? There's a number on the back of my paychecks, and I want to try calling it to find out more. Like, what would they do if I tried going somewhere else? Would they let me? Because it's gone. The days of Ellen Ditzworth are gone. The days of a good back and strong legs are gone. The person I was before I saw that drifter die is gone. Yesterday is gone. The past is a shared hallucination. Only the present is real. I need to get out of here before I lose more of myself. I'm never going to understand this place. I realize that now. I can only accept that it exists and try to move on, which I should have done the day I saw those stars. Because there is an abyss, and it doesn't flow through time like we do. Doesn't occupy space like we do. But it's there, and it's full of gods the way a koi pond is full of fish. And I'm worried the more I think about it, the worse the park gets, and the closer I get to falling into waters that have no up or down, and which never ever end. In my dreams, I am choking in the acidic bile of a creature that swallowed me whole. I'm worried that if I stay here much longer, I'll forget how to wake up. Second story. Why I never answer when someone calls my name while I'm hunting. All these stories about the wilderness made me remember a story my cousin told me. Hunting is a huge part of the culture in Hawaii, and kids often learn from a very young age how to hunt. My cousin, who is in his late 20s now and has been hunting for a good 20 years of his life, has had some strange experiences in the wilderness, but this one always stuck with me as the weirdest one. Have you ever heard of a calling spirit? I'm sure they exist outside of Hawaii, but the gist is if you're somewhere like the woods or you're alone somewhere, if you hear someone call your name, you do not answer. Bad things happen when you answer. I'm going to write the story like how he told it to me. I was around 8 years old when this happened, when I had just started going hunting. Me, my cousins, and my uncle went hunting one evening in Wailua. By the time we were done, we were about a mile away from our truck. It was about 9 p.m. and it was dark. My uncle said, "I'm going to go get the truck. You kids wait here." But my cousins wanted to go with my uncle. I said, "I'll wait right here. You come get me. I'm not walking." I was over walking. My uncle was like, "You sure you want to wait alone?" I said, "Hell no. I'm not walking. I'll wait." So he said he would be back in half an hour with the truck. Not too long after they left, I heard something moving in the bushes. Then I heard my uncle's voice. "Hey, Kai, come on, let's go." I said, "Hell no, I'm not walking back." And then my uncle whistled. You know when you're out playing with the other kids in the neighborhood and your dad whistles for you to come inside. And you know when you hear that whistle, you better go fast? That's the kind of whistle it was. So I jumped up and started walking. My uncle was walking ahead of me. I couldn't see him in the bushes, but I could hear him because he's saying things like, "You don't want to listen, you're going to get in trouble." Then he said, "Come on, let's go down here." He wanted to go into the bushes off the path. I knew something was wrong. I said, "But I thought we were going back to the truck." Just then, I saw headlights back in the direction we started. And then I heard my uncle's stereo blasting, the only song he ever plays when he goes hunting. I start running. I take off, and something grabs my backpack. I fly my arms back, and I let whatever it was take my bag. I get to the truck, and my uncle asks, "Where's your stuff?" I point back to where I was and say, "I was following you." My uncle turns pale and yells, "Get in the car now." I'm bawling. I'm scared. I know I messed up. I know you never answer when someone calls, but it sounded just like my uncle. He immediately took me to my other uncle, who blessed me. Till this day, when I go hunting, I never answer when anyone calls my name. Third story. How I survived and killed a Wendigo. My family was shocked when we heard our Uncle Benjamin was found dead in the woods surrounding his vacation home. I didn't know him very well, as he lived far away from most of the family. So, I only saw him at family meetings. His funeral wasn't a big event. There were my two aunts, Lucy and Laura, my other Uncle Stephen, and my little nephew, Mikey. In Bensville was written that I got his vacation home. I figured that it was nice to spend some time in a place where there was no distraction, as I had to study for my exams. Also, if I would rent a small apartment, I would probably have to live off instant noodles and water for a few months. The day after the funeral, I packed up my things so that I could move to my new home. The drive itself was uneventful, though I did underestimate the length of the drive. When I was driving through the woods, I thought that I saw a face or two amongst the trees, but I just blamed it on my mind for being a bit sleepy, as it was around 11 p.m. when I arrived. Once I was there, I put all the food I had in the fridge and made my bed so I could sleep. When I woke up the next day, I showered, made some breakfast, and hopped in front of the TV to watch a show on Netflix. Halfway through my show, I thought I heard barking coming from the woods, but didn't think anything of it as I thought it was coming from my show. However, the barking did not stop, so I decided to check it out. I walked a bit in the direction I thought it was coming from, but I couldn't find anything. So I shrugged and walked back. The rest of the day was uneventful. I did, however, sort out a few moving boxes. As it was getting kind of late, I decided to watch one more episode of my show and head to bed afterwards. The next day started off normal. I showered, ate breakfast, and started to unpack a few boxes. However, around 10 a.m. I heard it again, barking. This time I knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me, as I heard it loud and clear. I directly stopped unpacking and went to investigate the noise. When I went into the woods to check out the sound, I found a tiny Labrador pup. It was covered in mud and scratches. I knew I couldn't just leave him there, so I took him home. I gave him a bath to get all the mud and filth off him, and then I took him to the closest vet, which was about 5 miles away. Once we arrived, I took a seat in the waiting room. I couldn't help but notice that the other people in the room had a small look of judgment towards me. I totally understood why, as the pup looked like he had been attacked. When it was our turn, I heard a soft whimper coming from the pup, but he did decide to walk with me to the room. After a few checkups, the vet asked me if I owned the pup. I said no, and that I found him in the woods. The vet went quiet for a second and asked me if I wanted him to check for a chip. I said yes, and the vet checked but found no chip. So I suggested that if he didn't belong to anyone, I could take care of him. The vet sighed and went to get the papers for me to fill in, so I could take the pup home. On the way home, I went to the local pet store to buy some toys, food, and a food and water bowl. After buying all the stuff I would need to take care of him, I thought of a name for him. After about 5 minutes of thinking, I came up with the perfect name. Winston. I called out. Winston directly jumped up from his seat and started barking and wagging his tail. When we got home, I directly put everything in place. I put his dog bed next to the couch with some toys and his food and water bowl in front of the TV. After that long day, I was very tired, so I decided to watch a few episodes of my show. When I sat down, Winston started whining whilst wagging his tail. I asked, "Do you want to sit next to me?" He answered the question with a happy growl and jumped on the couch beside me. I watched TV until it was around 10 p.m. and decided to go to bed. I decided to put Winston's bed in the bedroom next to me for the first night, so that he could get used to the house. When I woke up the next morning, I noticed that Winston's bed was empty and that the bedroom door was open. I thought that he had walked through the door to watch the birds through the giant window in the living room. However, when I went to check, I didn't see him. But then I noticed that the front door was wide open, even though I knew I locked it the previous night. My heart dropped. I panicked and ran out of the door to find him. After about 20 minutes of searching, I finally found him with a leaf he found in his mouth. I picked him up and carried him inside. It was near lunchtime, so I decided to put a frozen pizza in the microwave. I was very hungry as I hadn't eaten anything for breakfast. After eating, I took Winston for a walk, but he kept on looking into the tree line, as if something were there. Each time I thought he saw something, I looked but couldn't see anything. After about 10 minutes of walking, I decided to head back to the house. I am glad I made that decision because right after I closed the door behind us, it started storming. The sky became a brown/yellow color, and I could see the clouds rolling over. I'd seen this weather only once before. I was visiting a friend that moved to the Netherlands. Then I first saw this type of weather. I decided to make some hot chocolate for myself and sat down on the couch to binge watch my show for a while. Winston was sleeping right next to me. After a while I fell asleep too, but I was awakened by Winston whining by the front door. I decided to check up on him and noticed that he was shivering from fear. I looked through the window of the front door and saw nothing. I figured it was some deer walking by that had spooked the little pup. I picked Winston up and carried him to the couch so that could cuddle him to ease his nerves. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to do an early morning walk with Winston. After walking a bit, I saw a pack of deer just roaming around in an open area in the forest. This only reinforced my thought of Winston being scared from some deer just roaming around on our property. However, when we came back from our walk, I noticed something different about the front door. Scratch marks. Upon closer inspection, I saw that the scratches were massive. They were all about 10 inches long and 1 inch deep. Now I'm no expert in forest animals, but I dang well knew that those didn't belong to a deer. I decided to call a door repairman to fix it. They arrived about 30 minutes. "Those are some massive marks on your door," Bud, one of the men, said. "Yeah, I would get something for protection if I were you," the other one said. I followed his advice and later bought a small pistol to protect myself and Winston. After I got back from the gun store, the men were already done with the door. I gave them a thank you and they left. The following day started as normal. I woke up, had an early shower, and decided to do another early walk with Winston. I saw 2 squirrels fighting over some pine cones, a flock of birds flying in the opposite direction of my house, and I think I spotted a small mouse running through the freshly fallen leaves. However, Winston was shivering against my leg, whining. I asked what was wrong, and he basically jumped. I decided then and there to head back. I heard something growl in the distance, and another flock of birds flew in the opposite direction of the sound. When I was back on my property, I noticed something weird. My front door was ripped from its hinges and was lying about 3 meters to the left. I directly pulled my pistol out of my pocket because I didn't know if who or whatever had left yet. When I walked into the house, I froze. There were scratches everywhere. Whatever had done this had enormous claws. Upon closer inspection, I noticed that the claw marks were the exact same as the ones on the door from yesterday. I also noticed that my fridge door was hanging from its hinges. When I looked in the fridge, I saw that it was a mess. All the meat was gone, and all the drawers were ripped out of the fridge. I put the front door back in its place using the tools I had recently unpacked and fixed up the fridge. After I was done, I decided to take a little break, so I sat on the couch with my drink. After a while, I moved my arm only to touch something wet and squishy. I jumped and looked at what I had touched. It was the body of a squirrel, well, at least what was left of it. The squirrel was mangled in gruesome ways. A part of its skull was missing, its intestines were hanging out of its stomach, and its hind legs were broken. However, it didn't bleed anymore. I guess all the blood was soaked into the couch. I cleaned up the blood and buried the squirrel. I put a small stick on the grave as a sign of respect. After that, I decided it was time to pack my things. When I was about halfway done with putting everything in boxes, it was already late in the evening. I figured it wouldn't hurt to stay here one more night, but I was very wrong about that. I was woken up by Winston. He had jumped on the bed to hide with me. He was shivering and whining because he sensed that something was wrong. I stood up. Winston let out a bark to warn me. God, I should have listened. I went to the front door as Winston was looking right at it. I looked through the window and saw something big. It looked like a deer, but I knew it wasn't one. It had massive antlers and a skull-like face, and the smell, oh God, the smell. It smelled like a corpse that had been rotting out in the sun for days. When I heard another bark coming from Winston, the thing looked up and tried to smash the door with its head. I directly pulled out my pistol and fired 2 shots. The thing howled in pain and ran away. After that thing ran away, I began to grab my stuff. I grabbed the most important things that I would need, picked up Winston, and ran to my car. When I opened the car door, I heard the thing let out a cry behind me. I didn't look back. I hopped in my car and drove off. I'm glad that there wasn't much traffic on the road, as I was going about 90 miles an hour. I mean, can you really blame me for it? I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. While driving to get out of the woods, I saw the trees flash by. It reminded me of the first night I got here. However, it looked much different in the daytime. It also reminded me of the face I had seen amongst the trees. I now know it wasn't my mind playing tricks on me that night, as the face I had seen looked exactly like the face of that thing. Lost in thought, I wasn't paying much attention on the road. However, I was directly awakened by the sudden movement in the trees. When I looked towards the movement, I jumped in my seat. The thing suddenly jumped in front of my car. I screamed. The creature looked at me and lunged towards me. I slammed the gas pedal and drove around the creature. It stared right at me with its hollow eyes as I drove past. For hours later, I was back in my hometown. I figured I would go to my aunt and Uncle Lucy and Stephen, but then I remembered that Mikey was allergic to dogs. So I went to my other Aunt Laura. I figured that she would like the company of me and Winston because of the sudden passing of her brother. I texted her. I was coming over and that I was taking my new friend with me. She told me that it was nice for me to come over, but then she asked me why I would drive all that way just to see her. I told her that I would explain when I got there. After about 20 minutes of driving, I arrived at her place. She opened the door and looked at my face. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she asked me. I guess I was still looking a bit frightened after today's events. I asked if we could go inside. She agreed, and we sat on the couch. "Is that your new friend?" she asked, looking at Winston. I told her yes, and that his name was Winston. "That's a cute name," she said. Then she asked why I was here and why I looked so pale. I told her everything. I told her about Winston, about that monster, and about all the weird stuff that happened. She went silent for a bit. Then she asked me if I could describe the appearance of the thing. I told her about the antlers, the skull-like face, and the smell. After I told her about it, she looked terrified. She told me that my uncle called her multiple times about a giant creature roaming around on his property, and the next day he was found dead near his vacation home. She then told me that there were massive claw marks on his corpse and that he was hanging from his intestines, which were pulled out of his stomach. I was shocked. I asked if she had a laptop or computer I could use. She said yes, and that she would go and get it for me. She came back with her old laptop and gave it to me. I opened Google and searched for the creature. After about 10 minutes of searching, I found out what kind of creature it was. It was called a Wendigo. After reading some bit, I knew that the creature that had attacked me was a Wendigo. I told Laura, and she was as pale as a ghost. We talked some more about all the events of the past week, but after about 20 minutes, Winston started whining. My aunt just chalked it up to Winston still being young, but I knew that wasn't the case. I told Laura that we needed to go, and she asked why. I told her that there was no time, but she insisted that she was going to stay. Then she looked at the window. Looking back through the kitchen window was the Wendigo. She screamed. I tried to run after her, but she was too fast. She ran out of the front door, only to face the Wendigo. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my life. The Wendigo opened its mouth and roared. Then it unhinged its jaw and bit her head clean off. Winston almost ran out of the door, but I picked him up just in time. The creature looked at me and grinned. I could still see pieces of my aunt on its teeth. I ran for the back door and out on the street. I didn't stop running until I could taste blood in my mouth. After checking if everything was safe, I collapsed underneath an oak tree. I was woken up in the morning by Winston. After remembering what had happened the previous day, I started crying. Winston curled up beside me to ease my nerves. "I'm glad you're here with me, buddy," I said. After fully waking up, I figured that the best thing to do was to go back to my car and drive far away from here. However, when I was back at Aunt Lara's house, I saw that my car was turned into a wreck. The windows were smashed, the metal had been turned into shreds, and one of my car doors was hanging loose. I checked the back seat and saw that my bag was intact. I had left all my money in the bag, so it was nice that I still had it with me. After grabbing my bag, I headed towards the shopping mall to buy some food, as I had left all my food in the vacation house. While walking, I realized that the Wendigo had most likely followed me. I decided to head to the library to learn more about the beast, mostly on how to get rid of it. When I entered, the nice librarian greeted me. I asked if there were any books about the Wendigo. She told me that she would check, and I gave her a thank you. After a while, she told me that there were 2 books in the horror section and 1 in the mythology section. I thanked her and headed to the horror section to find them. After searching for about 8 minutes, I found them. Once I was done, I headed to the mythology section to find the last book. Then I headed to the exit. The librarian asked me if I had a pass, and I told her no, but that I had money. She scanned the books, and I left. I decided to head to the grocery store afterwards, as I noticed it was lunchtime already. I bought a sandwich for myself and some treats for Winston. After eating, I decided to head to the local park to walk Winston. I walked about 10 minutes until I found a bench and decided to sit down and read the books I bought. When I opened the first book, I directly looked up on how I could kill the beast. When I couldn't find anything, I opened the second book. After looking, I didn't find anything either. I opened the last book that I had gotten from the mythology section. When I searched, I found information on how to kill the Wendigo. I directly went to the page and read that I needed silver bullets or a silver weapon. I remembered that there was a gun store about 1 mile away, so I decided to pack my things and head in that direction. When I entered the store, I asked if they had silver bullets. They told me they had and that they would go and look for me. Sometime later, they came back and put a small box on the counter in front of me. I knew that it was going to be pricey, but I had enough money to buy 10 bullets. I also bought a new gun, as I figured that my pistol was too small to even fit the bullets. After I made my purchase, I walked out of the door and was greeted by Winston, who was wagging his tail happily. I told him that we were finally safe and that I was going to protect him no matter the cost. He let out a bark of joy, and we walked off. After my little trip to the gun store, it was almost evening. I knew I had enough time to get ready for the fight with the Wendigo. I put 3 of my bullets in the gun and waited. After about 6 minutes of waiting, Winston started whining. I knew then and there that the beast was close. I stood up and turned off the safety of my gun. I heard the thing roar in the distance. I looked in the direction of the sound, and there it was, the Wendigo. I immediately fired 2 shots, and the beast howled out in pain, and it started charging towards me. I fired another shot, which gave me enough time to reload. I put another 3 bullets in the gun and fired all of them a second later. One of the bullets had hit its leg and another its eye. It collapsed and it cried out in pain. Winston started throwing a barking fit, which agitated the beast more, but it couldn't do anything as one of its legs was broken. I loaded another 3 bullets in the gun and fired the final 3 shots right into its heart. It fell unconscious, but I knew it wasn't dead as I had read that I needed to cut the heart out. I grabbed my survival knife and walked towards the hellspawn. I stabbed the rest of its legs and slit its throat. Then I began carving in its chest to get to the heart. After about 20 minutes of cutting, I had finally cut out the heart. I put the heart in my bag and headed back to Winston. Winston was hiding on the other side of the rock, where I had waited for the beast. Once he heard my voice call out, he started sprinting towards me. I kneeled and he started giving me kisses. I cleaned my hands in the nearby lake, and we headed towards the nearest motel to sleep. When I woke up the next day, I showered, had breakfast, and headed to the nearest church so I could bury the heart. When I showed it to the nuns there, they escorted me to a burial place. I grabbed a shovel and started digging. After about 5 minutes of digging, I had created a big enough hole to bury the heart in. I put the heart in the hole and closed it. Then I went to the nearby field to pick 2 flowers, an ox-eye daisy for my uncle and a buttercup for my aunt, as it was her favorite flower. I walked back to the grave and placed down the flowers. I then went to my Aunt Lucy and my Uncle Stephen. I told them about everything. When I was done talking, they were speechless. I couldn't blame them, as I knew that the story would shock them. After they processed the story, they asked me if I was okay. I told them that I was still a bit shocked from everything that has happened. After we were done talking, they showed me the room I could stay in and then asked me if I could keep Winston away from Mikey, as he was allergic. I told them that it would be no problem as Winston was very well behaved. After we had lunch together, I asked if they had a laptop I could use. Uncle Stephen went to get it for me, as me and my aunt chatted for a bit. A minute later, Stephen came back with a laptop and handed it over to me. I then excused myself from the table and went to my room, where I began typing this story to get this message out to everyone. All I have to say is this: listen to your instincts. It saved my life, and I believe it could also save many others as well. If you notice some strange things in the woods, get out of there as quick as you can. It's hunting you. 4th story: Wendigo's Spirit, long-lost journal of a Viking explorer. Last year, I was hiking with a buddy of mine in the woods in eastern Newfoundland. For those who don't know, it's in the far eastern part of Canada. We are both originally from the Vancouver and have been avid hikers and campers for many years, traveling to all parts of Canada and currently working on our visas to America actually. While we were on a 2-day hiking trip camping where we saw fit, we stumbled off path as we thought we saw a cave farther off into the distance. After about 3 to 4 minutes of walking off the dirt path into the woods, we approached it, and indeed it was a cave. Knowing that caves are super neat, but also very dangerous for many reasons, we just looked around for a bit before deciding if we should check inside if it's clear or not, as it would make a good spot to have camp for the night. Caves are home to many animals ranging small to large, bears, wolves, to name a couple of the more dangerous animals to be exact. We eventually grabbed our flashlights from our backpacks and entered the cave entrance cautiously. The cave was pitch black, and once we had walked inside, noticing how deep it actually was. From the outside, it looked like a 6 to 7 foot wide opening with about a 5-foot ceiling. But once you stepped inside, it had a good open space ID guess to be about 15 by 15, which was more than enough space for the 2 of us to set up camp and get a fire going for the night. In the back of the space was what looked like a small pathway of some sort. It was narrow and looked like the earth cracked it just enough for someone to walk through it. Where it led, we had no clue, and I wasn't really wanting to find out at that moment. We were tired, looking to rest, and didn't feel like venturing off into the uncharted cave deeper and risking falling or getting hurt or stuck, or God knows what else happens to people in caves. There was a faint water dripping noise down that dark pathway which echoed throughout the cave. Sounded spooky to me, but then again, maybe there's some fresh water nearby we can collect for tomorrow hike, I told my buddy. Once we set up our things, I told him I'd go check it out and see if I could find the source of the water, as I held out water containers in my now empty pack and my flashlight in my right hand. The pathway was twisted and narrow, and honestly, it was just better that I went alone, plus I doubt my bud would have went with me anyways. He was tired as hell and was just ready to eat and go to sleep. I tucked and squeezed myself through with my pack and eventually found the source of the water after a minute or so walking deeper into the cave system. This cave kept going and going. I could see further ahead, but I found the source thankfully not too far in. There was a small stream that flowed down the rocky service wall into a small puddle-like area, then disappearing into the rocks and earth. As I shunned my flashlight around, I happened to come across a pouch of some sort which was made of animal fur. I thought it was an animal at first and stood frozen in my tracks. I walked over to the fur ball and grabbed it. I realized the fur was just wrapped around something flat and hard in its center. As I looked, it seemed to have unraveled an old as hell looking leather book of some sort. I was really memorized about the find, but then realized how thirsty I was and took care of filling up our water containers first and bring this book and fur back with me back to our little campsite at the cave entrance. Once I got back, my friend had already gotten the fire going, which felt really nice as I sat down handing him his water. The night was on its way out with the sun starting to set. I told my friend about the book and let him take a look at it. He was always the history buff anyways. I just liked video games and hot chicks. He told me that this journal looked really old and is really surprised it in the shape that it's in. He pointed to the off shapes that were on the cover and on parts of the pages on the inside. They looked like runes he mentioned. I didn't recall what runes were, and he told me that in fact that was the way of communication writing back in the Viking days. As he read, I mumbled to himself, "Dude, this is written in English," which is odd unless this person or Viking traveler was educated or had traveled more than most. He read on for a few minutes and told me to check it out as it mentioned this cave on one of the pages. He handed me the book, and he laid back onto his mat and started to relax. I, on the other hand, was totally excited. Not only did I just find some ancient Viking journal in some cave in the middle of nowhere, but it was readable too. "This has to be worth some money," I said to him. He opened his eyes and just replied, "Dude, just read it or go to sleep." I smirked at him, and I laid my back up against the side cave wall and started to read the notes from inside this journal. "If you're finding this journal, that means I am dead. My name is Bjorn Erling, and the year is 1004 AD. I do not know the exact date of these entries as I've been stuck here in this cave for some time now. Our ship had arrived to the shores of this new-found land several weeks prior to these entries. There was 40 of us in total and have built a small village right off the shore past the wood line. We have an altercation with the natives of this land, as they do not speak any language that I have heard before. They attacked our fort on the second week we are here. Several of our members have died, and most of theirs too in the process. We can't seem to communicate properly with them, and they keep attacking in the middle of the night, and we are trying our best to bessen our defenses. We have built walls around our village, but they always seem to find a way inside, picking us off one by one. They're not big people, quite small in fact, but there are many, and our next ship isn't due here for another week or more. I was out hunting with a brother of mine in these woods. We went deeper than we have been as our people are hungry and we needed meat. The sun was dim and the colors above were quite pleasant to see when it was visible from all the trees overhead. We started hearing noises echoing around us in the woods. Not knowing what they were, we followed them. No sense at turning back. These sounds would have already startled off any catch we may have been tracking. As we continued deeper and deeper into the woods, the noises and snapping sounds became louder. We had no idea what was in store for us at the time, but we had to investigate. During our proustite, that when we both heard a familiar-sounding voice speaking to us. It sounded like one of our other Viking brothers back at the village that had gone missing during one of the attacks for the natives. "Bjorn, help me. They have me trapped here, and I cannot escape." My brother screamed, "By Odin, where are you?" Silence. The voices didn't reply. I gripped my sword handle on my waist, and my brother held his bow with a firm grip. "Do you think that was really Kinjo?" "I don't know," I replied, "but we need to find out either way. It def sounded like him." We heard our brother speak again, but this time it spoke to use twice, but from different directions in front of us. "Levi, why did you not help me in the village? Hurry, I don't have much time." My brother Levi ran off to the left and motioned with his arm pointing for me to follow the other sound to the front right from our location. I nodded and readied my sword. After we had split up, I started to have a feeling of dread, and airy feeling was washing over me. This felt off. None of this seemed right. The natives didn't speak our language, and that voice did sound like our brother Nook, but it was off and away too. Not soon after, that's when I heard the screaming. The screaming of Levy. Rushing back in the direction I saw him walk to, I hurried as fast as I could, no longer caring about keeping the silence as I ran and screamed out to him, trying to find his whereabouts. Further in the distance is when I saw it. I cannot even call it a man. It was some kind of forest creature. It was skinny like it was starting and shaped like a man from what I could muster. Its long arms clawed my friend, dragging his now lifeless body further into the dark woods. This creature had antlers on its head like some kind of deer. We have gods like this back home. Had they followed us here to this new land and now punishing us for becoming Christians? I was in total shock, but there was no choice in the matter, and I was losing sight of them in the dark now, and there was a good distance still between us. I ran as fast as I could, but even in doing so still couldn't keep up with this creature dragging Levy. I picked up his bow off the grass along the chai and ended up finding this cave on this hillside. I just knew that creature had taken my brother into that cave. There was nowhere else in eyesight where it could have gone and disappeared to. Once in the cave, I explored as much as I could after making a makeshift torch with some fabric from my clothing on a nearby stick I had found. The space was tight. I found the bloody drag marks right away, so my hunch was correct. Levy was brought somewhere inside this cave system. I had gotten lost a couple of times within this cave. It is more than meets the eye, but always seem to find my way back to the water source as the constant dripping which echoes the labyrinth halls leads me back to here. I cannot leave him. I cannot leave my brother. I must avenge him and place his bow in his hand so that the Valkyries may take his soul to heaven or Valhalla to meet his family in paradise forevermore. I'm writing this all down with the best of my knowledge in case I do not make it back out of this cave from which I ventured. Someone must know what happened to us. Someone must be led aware of this creature out in the woods. I hear my brother calling me now, far off, echoing off somewhere in this cave. I must end this log for now. If I return, I will update what I find. Goodbye for now. That was the last thing written in this journal. The rest of the pages were blank. Dude, wake up. I have to tell you something. Fifth story. Stay out of the Ozarks. I've been a biologist ever since I was 22 years old. I grew up on a farm in rural Illinois, so nature has never been a stranger to me. Playing in the woods was how I entertained myself growing up. Spending all my time in a forest as a child, people expect me to have stories about Bigfoot or strange noises or finding some weird shrine out in the middle of the woods. But no. The weirdest thing I ever encountered was a bobcat screeching. It sounds just like a woman's dying scream. And yes, to everyone who's ever claimed to hear of Skinwalker or Go Man screeching in the woods at night, I promise you, it was just a bobcat. The truth is often mundane and disappointing. You'd think this would mean I'd have gotten bored of the woods, but I never really lost my love for them. Nature is boring. That's why I like it. You know what to expect. That's why, after college, I decided to make studying nature my full-time career. I'm a biologist for the Sierra Club, specialized in the ecosystems of Midwestern America. Fish, birds, deer, elk, bear, wolves, the like. I've spent weeks in fire towers, cabins, campsites, always miles away from civilization. I'm usually gathering data on local wildlife, measuring for pollutants, determining whether the ecosystem is stable or if anything threatens it. The work is not glamorous, but I enjoy it, and nature had still never surprised me. Until my last assignment, I was designated to be stationed, alone, in a cabin in the Ozarks. The assignment was supposed to last 3 weeks in May. The Sierra Club was alerted to a steady decline in the local elk population over the last decade. Nothing drastic, but enough to raise concern. My job was to take census of the wildlife, measure for pollutants, the usual. These are my diary entries for my assignment, starting with my first night. I arrived in the evening in early May. Nothing was amiss the first 2 nights. It seemed an assignment like any other. The sounds of the forest were exactly what you'd expect. Crickets, an owl's hoot, and the occasional elk call. I was sent here in May because that's their mating season. The elk are out and about looking for, dates, and that makes them easy to count. Elk mating is pretty straightforward. The female lets out a call and waits for a male to find her. Usually it's first come, first served, if you catch my drift. If only, right? It was clear that love was in the air, and for all the calling, you'd think I would start seeing elk. But by the second day, I still hadn't spotted a single one. The third night, I was lying awake in bed uneasy. Something wasn't sitting right with me, but I couldn't put my finger on why. I was about to nod off when a female call cut through the night. I sighed. That was the second time that night I'd heard her. What? Are the fellas having a guy's night in or something? And that's when it finally hit me. I shot bolt upright in bed. For the last 3 nights, I had heard nothing but female mating calls that should have drawn every male within half a mile. Now elk are not discreet, and they don't beat around the bush. When that male gets to the female, well, let's just let the whole forest will know about it. I sat in bed, staring out into the night, pondering. There have to be males close enough to hear this female. So after 3 nights of her calls, why haven't I heard the main event? The third day, I went out onto the trails, once again looking for some sign of elk in the forest. What I found was not encouraging. About a quarter mile from my cabin, I was trekking down the trail when I noticed something 30 feet into the woods. A large brown, fuzzy mass lying in the brush. I smiled. An elk taking a midday nap? I took out my binoculars to get a closer look. It was an elk, all right, but my smile dropped when I realized that the brown, fuzzy mass was completely still. I carry a hunting rifle with me for safety. I readied it and approached the elk carefully. It looked fine from where I was standing, but I nearly dropped my rifle when I rounded to the animal's front. It was carnage. The poor creature had been completely gutted. What little remained of its entrails hung loosely out of its chest cavity. The ribs had been pulled apart, and huge claw marks scarred its flank. Its head was barely connected to its body by a few weak strands of flesh. I heaved and almost lost what little breakfast I'd had. It was horrifying. I had to take a few moments to collect myself. This was the first time that nature had surprised me. What could have possibly done this? I've studied wildlife for years. This was a bull elk in its prime. It would have stood 9 feet tall alive, a king of the forest. There is no predator on this continent that could have taken down a full-grown bull, pack or no pack. Even a grizzly wouldn't mess with something this big. And bears are mostly scavengers anyway. My mind raced through possibilities, trying to think of an explanation. Maybe it had been sick. Maybe a predator came upon it in its sleep, took it by surprise. Yes, that must be it. It couldn't have fought back. But this savagery, those claw marks were bigger than even a grizzly's. And its ribs, no quadruped could have exerted leverage on the ribs to split them like that. You would need arms. A chilling thought occurred. A human? Could humans have done this? But why? Hunters would skin it, or take the head at least to mount on their wall. Is some psychopath out here dismembering wildlife for fun? And that still wouldn't explain those gruesome claws. Whatever this was, it needed to be reported. I was sent here to investigate the elk population declining, and this had to be related. I fished out my camera to take photos. Having to document the horror from every angle was heart-wrenching. The look in its eyes. This elk had been terrified when it died. I want to take one last shot. Just as the shutter clicked, my ears registered something. A sound from behind me that my camera had nearly drowned out. I whipped around. I had barely heard it, but it was there. A twig snapping. My camera hung from my neck, and my rifle from my shoulder. I dropped the one to snatch up the other. Idiot, I thought to myself as I pointed the rifle towards the sound. I had been so shaken by the sight of the body, I had completely overlooked one important fact. The kill was fresh. This corpse hadn't even begun to decay. This elk had been dead no more than half a day. And that means whatever killed it may still be nearby. With my rifle still trained on the spot, I backed away towards the trail. My hike back to the cabin was the only time in my life I felt scared of the forest. Trees surrounding me on all sides, no visibility. I jumped at the slightest sounds, never lowering my rifle, never going more than 5 seconds without looking behind me. I felt like prey, never knowing where the danger would come from, or when. I didn't relax until my cabin door was closed and locked behind me. I spent the rest of my day inside the cabin, shaken. I readied the photos and sent them to my supervisors. They would take a day or two to respond. Until then, my plan was to investigate. During the day, and with my rifle ready, that night was my last night at the cabin. I was getting ready for bed when I heard a female elk call again. The first one that I'd heard that day. And close. Very close. Wildlife don't like buildings. They smell of fire and metal and gasoline, all unnatural to them. They steer clear. What was this elk doing so close to my cabin? I peered out my window into the dark of the forest. No sign of her. She must have been beyond the tree line. I grabbed my rifle. Of course, I wasn't going to shoot the elk, but I might send a few shots into the air to scare her off. It would be nice to know the elk are breeding normally, but I could do without front row seats. I unlocked my cabin and took a step out onto my porch, rifle still in hand. My eyes scanned the tree line, looking for the female. That's when a pair of antlers struck out from behind a tree. An elk's head followed them and turned peer right out at me. But this was a buck, probably attracted by the female's calls. This was promising, but all the more reason to scare them away. I raised my rifle to the sky and prepared to fire. That was when the elk flew into the air. Or its head did. The buck's head sailed in an arc towards me and landed just feet away from my door. I stood there in shock, trying to process what had just happened. Something or someone had been holding the head and had just thrown it. I nearly pissed myself in fear. I pointed my rifle at the tree where the buck's head had appeared. The light from my cabin barely reached. Were my eyes playing tricks on me? Had I just seen claws retreat around the trunk? I was frozen. I needed to reach behind me to open my door and get back inside. But I was too scared to turn my back on the forest or even take a hand off of my rifle. After a few seconds, I finally gathered up the nerve to brace the rifle against my shoulder, my fingers still on the trigger. I groped behind me until my left hand found the doorknob, never taking my eyes off the tree. Thank God the door had not locked behind me. With my left hand, I turned the knob and pushed open the door, then drew it back to my rifle. I backed away quickly into the cabin, slamming the door and locking it. I hurried to the windows, drawing all my blinds and making sure each was locked, never letting my rifle out of arm's reach. The terror I felt as I approached each window, never knowing if there would be someone or something on the other side of the glass staring back at me. There hadn't been, which was almost as unnerving. I rushed to the satellite phone to call the sheriff's office at the base of the mountain. The relief I felt when they picked up. "You need to get up here," I pleaded. "Who is this?" It was a sheriff's deputy on the other end. I'd met him and the sheriff before beginning my stay at the cabin. "It's me. I'm the guy stationed up at the cabin on the mountain." "Oh, sorry about that. What's the problem?" "There's someone up here fucking with me." "Get up here now." Whoa, slow down. You mean like kids or something?" "No, it is not fucking kids. Someone up here just threw a decapitated elk head at my cabin." In my panic, I'd somehow kept the awareness to use the phrase someone instead of something. I didn't want this guy to think I was drunk or crazy. I just needed him to get up here. Well, what did they look like? How many were there? Did they have guns? I have no fucking idea, man. They killed a goddamn elk, cut the head off, and threw it at my cabin. Just get the hell up here. Oh shit, okay, lock yourself in there. We're on our way. Man, please stay on the line. I'm scared here. I really was terrified. I wanted someone to stay on the phone with me, even if it couldn't help me. The man replied, I can't get to you and stay on the line at the same time. I'm calling the sheriff now. We're on our way. Just lock yourself in and stay there. The man hung up. I swore. I was alone again. A female elk call rang out again. This time it was even closer. It sounded like it was right outside now. I took up my rifle again. That's when the tapping started. While I was talking to the deputy, I hadn't been watching the windows. The sound was coming from the window to the right of my front door. My eyes widened in horror. A single gray claw was tapping on the right edge of the window. Just one claw. Whatever it was attached to wanted to stay out of sight. The claw stopped tapping. Instead, it drew itself along the window and out of my sight, leaving a long, ugly scratch. The sound was horrible, but it didn't stop when it left the window. I could still hear it dragging along the wooden walls of my cabin. The creature was scratching through solid wood. Could it break through my windows? Why didn't it? My knees shook. I tracked the sound of the scratching with my rifle. My mind raced. Could this thing get in? How long until the sheriff showed up? I was high up on the mountain. The drive up here took 45 minutes. Even if they hurried, it might be a half hour. Even if they did get here, could they stop this thing? Should I make a run for my truck? No. Whatever that thing was, it could get to me before I got the truck up and running. Something nagged at the back of my head, but I could barely think. The scratching was louder and louder. Whatever this thing was, it had torn a bull elk to shreds. How could I stop it? The bull. That's when I realized it. The head. It was the same head as the bull I'd seen earlier. It had the same scar down its right cheek. This thing was taunting me. It must have been there when I found the dead elk. It had been watching me, and now it had thrown the head at me. Was it telling me to go away? To get out of its territory? I gasped. With my mind racing, I hadn't noticed that the scratching had stopped. Where's that thing? My eyes darted from window to window. No sign of it, until the loud thud right above me. It's on the goddamn roof. I thought. Its footsteps echoed through my cabin. Between each step came rhythmic taps, no doubt from its claws. Was it testing for weaknesses? Was it merely toying with me? It had only been a few minutes since I called the sheriff's office. I was still far from safety. I hadn't moved since the call. The thing on my roof thudded from spot to spot. The shock was starting to wear off. Focus. Think. I told myself. The thing had probably seen me through my window. It was right above me. The bathroom. The bathroom was the safest spot. There were no windows. If it does break in, it will have to look for me, then break through the bathroom door. That might buy me an extra minute, and it might save my life. The creature knew where I was. I had to try to change that. I slowly slipped off my shoes. Keeping my rifle trained on the roof, I kicked a shoe towards my bed. Sure enough, the thuds on my roof followed, stopping right above the spot where my shoe had landed. It's tracking me. I slowly shuffled to the bathroom, not raising my feet, afraid to make a sound. Praying that the door would not creak, I opened the bathroom, preparing to lock myself inside. I was shutting myself in, hoping that I wouldn't die in this bathroom, when I heard a loud scratch, followed by a dull thud. It had jumped off the roof. It was on the ground again, outside the cabin. Why? Was it going away? I was afraid to hope that maybe it had gotten bored. Maybe it had found some other prey. That was when I heard the woman scream. I gasped and covered my mouth. How was that possible? No one else is up here. A hiker? A camper, maybe? The scream came again. Help, she cried out. I gripped my rifle, crying now. I was frozen in fear. That thing was out there, chasing some poor woman, and I was too cowardly to help her. I just wanted to stay in that bathroom, hiding, hoping that every second the thing spent chasing that woman was another second closer to the sheriff getting here. I don't know how long I sat there, cowering. Another, more desperate scream. Help me! There was something in her terror. She was more scared than I was. And there I sat, letting her die. My shame overcame my fear. I gripped my rifle tighter and left the bathroom. I marched to the door, ready to face whatever this creature was. Maybe I could distract it, buy time for her to get away. Maybe the sheriff would find her, even if the thing got me first. Just as I was reaching for the doorknob, she cried out again. A pained, dying scream. I was too late. That thing had gotten to her. I was a coward, and because of that, she was dead. The woman moaned in pain, this time just a few meters away from my door. This must be her final moments. And I listened, safe in my cabin. She groaned once more. But this sounded different somehow. My eyes widened in shock and realization. I drew my hand from the doorknob, as if it had burned me. I had never unlocked it. Thank God. The moan came again. This time, unmistakable. That was not a moan of pain or terror. It was an entirely different kind of moaning. I backed away from the door. You motherfucker, I muttered. You almost got me? It all made sense now. There never was any female elk. Mimicry is a common adaptation in all ecosystems, both for prey and for predators. This thing, it let out female elk cries to draw in males. And then, I had already seen the result in the forest. That's why I never heard the elk mating. There was no female waiting for them, only this monster. And now it was trying the same tactic on me. I nearly sobbed in terror. It had tried to lure me with the sound of a woman in distress. It thought that might draw me out. When that didn't work, it switched to its tried-and-true method, a mating call. I aimed my rifle at the door. The moans continued, louder and more intense, building into a climax. I was nauseous at the thought of whatever was out there, squatting in the dark, mouth agape, emitting this perversion of a woman's voice, trying to draw me out into the dark and rip me apart just like that elk. I stood with my rifle trained at the door, not moving. I had resolved that I was going to stand there until the sun rose or until the sheriff came, and the moment I saw this thing, I was going to shoot it. I don't know how long I stood there among the echoes of that sick creature. Eventually, the moans puttered out, and I was left in silence, until the tapping began again, in the same spot as before. There it was, that single gray claw, tapping on that same spot where it had scratched the glass. But then a second claw joined it, then a third. It drummed them along the glass. Slowly, ever so slowly, a patch of gray poked out from the edge of the window. Time stopped, and the creature brought its face into full view. It was terrible, like a sloth, but its mouth and nose were caked in blood. It had tiny, beady eyes front-facing, a predator's eyes, large, pointed ears almost like a bat, thin, cracked lips. The monster looked right into my eyes. It cocked its head, and then it pulled those terrible, bloody lips back into a smile. Its razor-sharp teeth, still stained with blood and flesh, I'll never forget them. It pointed that hideous grin at me as it drummed those claws on my window. Shoot, 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 I told myself. But I was frozen. This thing was going to kill me. Light poured through the front window. The monster disappeared out of sight. The sheriff and deputy had arrived in their truck. The two of them sauntered up to my porch and knocked. I had to shake myself out of my stupor and open the door. Both of them backed off and drew their weapons at me, screaming at me to put the gun down. I was still in shock. I think the only thing that kept them from shooting me was the terrified look in my eyes. They asked me what the hell was going on. I could barely speak. I just kept frantically repeating that they needed to get inside, that it was still out there, They eventually told me to come with them down to the sheriff's station. At first, I refused to leave the cabin. They sort of half-dragged, half-walked me to the truck. They said I was like an owl the whole ride down, my head on a swivel, always scanning the tree line for it. I must have fallen asleep after I got to the station. I woke up the next morning in a cell. I was confused and disoriented. I nearly wept from fear when I finally remembered everything I had been through the night before. The sheriff and deputy sat me down in a room and asked me what the hell happened that night. I was silent at first. I didn't know what to tell them. If I told the truth, they'd think I was crazy. They asked me about the elk's head that I'd told them about during the call. It was gone when they got there. Just a bloody stain on the ground where it had been lying. I made up a story, said that some kids were prowling around my cabin, making noises, trying to scare me. I called the sheriff's office because I thought I saw one of them with a gun. The sheriff only made me go over the story once. He seemed satisfied. He took me back up there the next day to collect my stuff, in broad daylight, of course. Sure enough, there were deep scratch marks along the side of the cabin. The sheriff didn't look at me. Kids, he said. We collected my things quickly and hurried back down the mountain. I reported to my supervisors that it was probably overhunting causing the population decline. They would never believe the truth. The sheriff saw me off while I was waiting for the bus to take me back home. He shook my hand and drew me in for one of the manly half-hugs. He gripped my shoulder. Don't come back, he whispered. I gave him a confused look. He stared me right in the eyes. It knows you now. Has your scent. Seen your face. Heard your voice. You got away once. It won't happen again. So don't ever come back. That was years ago. I burned the clothes that I had worn that trip, so there's no way they'd end up near the Ozarks again. Never been back anywhere near the Ozarks. And anyone who's ever asked me, I always tell them to steer clear. I've spent so much time trying to forget what I saw that night. But that face, I remember every detail. It's kept me up so many nights with so many questions. What the hell was it? Some freak of nature? A mutant that somehow survived past infancy? Something supernatural? An alien? Those ears, perfectly crafted to detect minute sounds, just like a bat. That explains its mimicry. It grew up in that forest, hearing the elk calls. After a while, it learned to copy them. I've spent so many nights asking myself, how? How did it know a woman's voice? I dread to ponder the answer. When sleep finally comes, I have nightmares. Nightmares about campers sitting around their fire, when all of a sudden they hear a voice calling out to them from the woods, crying for help. The voice in my nightmares, calling them into the darkness of the trees, away from the safety of their fire. The voice, my voice. Thanks a lot for watching the video. Till the end, subscribe to Horror in Detail for more videos. Drop your suggestions in comment section.